Welcome back to Let's Make a Game, a channel about making computer role-playing games using the free program Twine and the Sugarcube format for Twine. In this video, I would like to talk about my current project of coding the combat system for a viewer's game. In particular, in the last video, we had the enemy's attack rolls coded, and then we could display a message saying what the result was, whether it was a success or a failure, or sometimes a long success or a long failure, which is what this system calls sort of extreme successes and failures. But that was all that you got. It didn't do any of the things that resulted from a success or a failure. So I've coded the results of the successes and failures, and that's what I'd like to show you and talk about in this video. So I've set up a combat. As you can see, we have an enemy that chooses the attack Buzz. They attack the player character, of course, because there's no companions here. They rolled a 9, and that is a success. So that is all stuff we've seen before, but this stuff is new, the consequences of the attack. So a Buzz attack is a special type of attack which doesn't do any damage, but which, if successful, requires the character, not necessarily the player character, but in this case it is, requires the target to roll 2 dice and add their strong score, and if they get a 7 or more, they manage to stay on their feet, and if they get 6 or less, they are knocked over. They're considered to be prone. So we can see that the player character has rolled a 2 and a 5, plus their strong score of 0. And if we look at their little character sheet here, we can see that they have a strong score of poor, which in numerical terms is indeed 0, for a total of 7. And that total is correct, and that should result in them managing to stay on their feet. And then they do another, they try and do a different attack, but it doesn't work. So that is a new thing, and it seems to be working as it should be working. But let's see if we can't get the enemy to do a attack that does do damage. Yep. No, that's another Buzz attack. Okay, sorry. I'll keep clicking through. See if we can get that. Yep. Okay, so we got one. The enemy has chosen the attack Swipe. They've rolled for a total of 8, so 5 and 2 plus 2 minus 1 is 8. And now, because this attack is a sort of normal attack that does damage, in particular it does sort of a basic amount of 1 damage. Now let's have a look at what we do in the damage calculation. So the attack does 1 damage, that's the sort of basic attack, that's the basic damage for the attack, plus the enemy's strong score of 2. Well, this is a female giant mosquito, and they do indeed have a strong score of 2, so that's correct. Minus the target's armor of 0. Well, that's correct because we haven't coded any way for the player character or their companions to get armor yet. That'll be something, that's not something I'm going to do because it's not something that happens in combat. It's something that happens, you know, in the sort of main part of the game where you're moving around and finding items and stuff. Minus the target's armor of 0 and their sneaky score of 1. Well, they have a sneaky of low, so that's correct. For a total of 2. Well, let's have a look at this. 1 damage plus 2 is 3. And minus 1 is 2. So yeah, the... sorry, I'm trying to highlight it. So this all adds up, and the player character takes 2 damage. And if we were to go back a bit, we'd see that, yeah, they had 8 hit points before, and now they only have 6. So it all seems to be doing what it's meant to be doing. Let's have a look at the code. So everything we're going to be looking at is in this one passage, Enemy Strikes. You can see that there's a couple of new passages coming off of it. Game Over, which is what happens when the player character is killed. Or Is Combat Over, which is what happens when an enemy is killed. And then when an enemy is killed, we have to check whether there are any enemies left. Because, of course, if there aren't, we have to finish the combat. However, I haven't actually coded anything in that. I've just set up the passage and then to be coded and discussed in a subsequent video. In this case, I've put a couple of notes as to how it's going to work, but I haven't done any actual code. So everything is in enemy strikes. There is a variable that's sort of new, and that is the variable prone, $P-R-O-N-E. And that keeps track of whether the player character and any companions are prone. At the moment, there's no way for the enemies to go prone, so if we add that, then we'll have to either have a new variable for the enemies, or we might use negative numbers for the enemies instead. So like -3, slot -3 means enemy 3. You can use negative numbers in arrays quite easily. It just treats them the same as any other number. But it's fairly straightforward. As it says here, 0 refers to the player character, 1 and 2 refer to companions 1 and 2, and the value in that slot will be 1 if the player character is prone, and if it's anything else, which will mean it's either not defined or 0, they're not prone. There's only 2 conditions here. You're either prone or not prone. And I said it's sort of new because I think I've talked about it before, but we haven't actually seen it in operation yet. So let's go to enemy strikes. So everything down to here we've seen. Everything that I've highlighted we've seen. That's all the attack roll. Everything new is from here on. So what we had before was we had if x2 is less than 4, then we give a message that it's a long failure, but we didn't actually do anything with that. It was just a message. And then we had else if x2 is under 7, then do this, give this message and so on. Well, we've obviously kept those messages, but we've added actually updating statistics of the game. So let's look at the options. First option, long failure. If it's less than 4, enemy injures themselves. That means we reduce their hit points by 1. That's what minus means. If their hit points are 0, we give a message saying that enemy such and such is dead. And we go to is combat over? And if that's not the case, then we just go to next action. So that's fairly simple. The next option is even simpler. We just say failure and we go straight to next action, because a failure doesn't do anything. It's a swing and a miss. No statistics are updated. It's just the next character gets to act. By far, most of the code is in this section, which is in case of a hit. And that's either a success or a long success. And I've decided to do them in the same section because most of the code is the same for a success and a long success. There's only some differences. There's more similarities than differences. So firstly, we have a message. If x2 is less than, x2 is the total of the attack roll. If x2 is less than 10, we say there's a success, and if it's not, we say it's a long success. That's fairly straightforward. Now there's 2 things we need to do. Firstly, we need to check, does the target need to roll to see if they go prone? And if so, we need to make that roll happen and then update things as necessary. And then secondly, we may need to calculate and apply damage. So dealing with, where are we? There we go. Dealing with rolling to go prone is down to there, and dealing with damage is from there onwards. So let's deal with going prone first. When do we need to roll to see if they go prone? Well, there's 2 circumstances and either of them are sufficient. So it's if something or something, which means if either of those things are true or if both of them are true. So if x2 is over 9, that's a long success. And the bonus of that long success, one of the bonuses of that long success, I've decided, is that the target has to roll to see if they go prone. The other time when attacks can make you go prone is if attacks y3 is equal to -1. So what does that mean? Well, y is the number of the attack that we're using. Slot 3 in the attacks array is the basic damage of that attack. However, if we've got -1 in there, well, an attack shouldn't do a negative damage, an attack shouldn't heal you. So -1 is what I've decided to use to indicate that it's this special kind of attack that knocks you down. It's the buzz attack. So if it's a buzz attack and or a long success, you have to roll to see if you're prone. Now, as I said before, there's only 2 conditions. You're either prone or not prone. And if prone Z is equal to 1, then you're already prone. And so there's no point rolling to see if you go prone, because you can't go more prone. You can imagine that you could have that in this system. Maybe if you're already knocked down, then it, pushes you around and you take some damage or something like that. But that's not what the system has decided to do. And so in that case, we just give them a message. Target is already prone. Otherwise, we need to roll. So we roll 2 dice, or we simulate doing that. We store that in X and W. Once again, we use random bracket 1, 6 end bracket for each of the dice. Then we get the player's strong score. So where is that stored? Well, it's the attributes are stored in ATT_PER, which stands for attribute by persona. And slot 1 happens to be where the strong score is. So we need to find the persona of the target. If it's the player character, if Z is 0, we use $PER, because that's the variable which stores the player character's persona. If it is more than 0, meaning it's a companion, then we look in COM-Z1. In hindsight, maybe I could have had, instead of having COM and then separate attributes, I could have used slot 0 of COM for the player character, and that might have been a bit more elegant, but I've done it now and it doesn't make a lot of difference. So in the case of Z being 0, we look in ATT_PER, PER1. Otherwise, we look in ATT_PER, COM-Z1, 1. We add those 3 things together. The roll, for the first roll, the second roll, and the strong score. We give a message. So we say player character or companion 2 rolls, let's say, a 3 and a 5, plus their strong score of such and such for a total of Z2. And if the score is less than 7, they're knocked prone. We set prone Z to 1. If it's 7 or greater, they manage to stay on their feet. And that is rolling to see if you go prone. Now we need to look at damage. If attacks Y3 is equal to -1 and X2 is less than 10, then that means it was a buzz attack and it wasn't a long success. And in that case, there's no damage to be calculated. So we just go straight to next action. Otherwise, we're going to need to calculate damage. So we're into the second bit of this now, the calculating damage. And we're going to store the damage, as the note says, in Z2. Now, if the attack is a buzz attack, and that must mean a long success, because if it was a buzz attack and it wasn't a long success, this if would have evaluated to true, and therefore it would have gone to next action, and we wouldn't be down here. So if we're down here, this means this is a long success and a buzz attack, and that does exactly 1 damage, which is, I've decided that's the bonus for a buzz attack long success. You get to do 1 unadjusted damage. Now, what does unadjusted damage mean? Well, you'll remember when we were playing the game, it said that it's minus the target's armor and minus their sneaky score. Whereas this, it's not adjusted by their armor or their sneaky score. It's just 1 damage for getting a critical hit, sort of thing. So that is fairly straightforward. We set Z2 to 1. Sorry. Otherwise, it's going to be more complicated. We're going to go for the basic amount of damage. That's attacks Y3. That's the same place where we checked to see if it was a buzz attack. So it does Z2 damage. Then we look at the attribute that is added to the damage, and that is in attacks Y4. And if it's a long success, we double that. So we look in that. We look at that attribute. We might say, okay, that's attribute 1, which is strong, and in fact, that's the only one that's used in the game. But rather than just say, let's use the strong variable, I decided to set it up so that we could use different attributes if we wanted to, just sort of making it a bit more complicated in return for having the option to do different effects more easily down the line. So we look at this this attribute. We find the value of that attribute, and if it's a long success, we double it. So let's look at the code. So Z3 is just the name of the attribute we're using. We go to att_name. What slot of att_name do we go to? We go to attacks Y4. So if it's 1, we'll look in att_name1, and that will be strong, as in the text strong. We also need to find the value of that. So we go enemy_att. So enemy_att is enemy attributes. It's like the equivalent to the persona attributes array that we looked at before. And the first slot is enemy_typ. That's enemy type. And the second dimension of this two-dimensional array is attacks Y4. So there we're going to get the value of the strong attribute, or whichever one is relevant. And then, because we have to double it on a long success, if x2 is greater than 9, we give the message plus double the enemy's Z3 score of W2, and we set it to itself times 2. We have to do it in that order, because otherwise we'd give the wrong information. So let's say, I'll give you an example. Let's say we're using the strong score, and let's say the strong score is 1. Well, what we need to do is we need to say, we'll double the enemy's strong score of 1, and then we need to double that to 2. If we did it in the other order, we'd double it, and then we'd say plus double the enemy's strong score of 2. But that's not right. The enemy's strong score isn't 2, it's 1, and then we've counted it double. And of course, if it's not a long success, it's fairly straightforward. We just give a message of that score, and we add that to Z2, because remember Z2 is the damage, the total damage. Then we reduce Z2 by the armor of the target. Then we reduce Z2 by the sneaky score of the target. We've already calculated the target's sneaky score because we need that for the attack roll. So it's calculated up here somewhere. And then we might have ended up with an amount less than 0. And of course, if it's less than 0, we don't want to increase the target's hit points. That wouldn't make sense. We need to change it to 0 if it's less than 0. So if Z2 is greater than or equal to 0, we just say for a total of 3, for example, or whatever it might be. Or we say for a total of -2, for example, changed to 0, and then we set that to 0. So now we've calculated the damage. Now we apply the damage. Well, if it's 0, there's no need to apply anything. Otherwise, it's either the player character or it's a companion. So if Z equals 0, then it's a player character. We reduce $HP by the damage. $HP is the player character's hit points. And then if HP is less than 1, that means the player character's dead. We go to game over. If they're not dead, we go to next action. The combat continues. Else, well, Z is not 0, so it's a companion. We set com Z2 minus equals Z2. So com Z2 is companion Z's hit points. We reduce that by Z2. If their hit points is less than 1, we just say companion Z is killed. And then we go to next action. And you might think, well, hang on, don't we need to check if the combat's over? No, we don't, because the player character is alive. And if the player character's alive, well, it doesn't matter if a companion dies, there's still somebody on that side to continue the combat. And so those are all the options. And that is how combat works. What we need to do next is we need to fill in these checks to see if combat is over. And we also need to allow the player character and their companions to attack. So those are what I'm going to do. I don't know which order, but that's what I'm going to do in the immediate videos to come. But for now, I hope that was useful or interesting to at least some of you, and I hope you will tune in next time.